Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from in the world today. Welcome to Energy and Utilities Africa Digital event, a new platform to bring together energy professionals from across the world in an interactive and safe environment to discuss key trends, opportunities and challenges facing all of us in the industry during the pandemic and beyond. I'm Andrew Roscoe, Editor of Energy and Utilities, and I will be the moderator for the session today. So firstly, 2020 has been a challenging year for all of us, for us personally and our businesses. So I hope that you and your families are safe and doing well. And staying connected now is more important than ever. And this week has been designed to allow you to do that. The opportunity to keep informed, but also interact with experts from around the world for regionally focused content and connecting with our global networks. It's interactive in the sense that we have the Q&A function for our webinar, so please make use of that today. Please submit as many questions as possible and we will endeavour to answer them all. And also through our networking tool GRIP. So this week isn't just a programme of webinars, we're also using the artificial intelligence networking tool GRIP. So please remember to log on to that and you can connect with your peers in the public and private sector and hopefully build relationships that will last a lot longer than this week. The theme of this two-day event is making electricity available for all, with governments, private sector and international financial institutions joining us this week for a series of discussions on the successes and failures of electrification across Africa and sharing lessons from abroad and locally on how to support future development. Over the last decade, we've seen the emergence of smart grids as one of the main applications for digital technology in energy. Trends such as renewable energy integration, automated metering, grid decentralization, and a growth in distributed power generation have driven this. So we had a topic yesterday on renewable energy in Africa, and that's obviously another key trend in the power market, that digitalization of grids will facilitate that, the move towards cleaner energy. Africa faces a unique set of challenges. The continent has the lowest electrification rate in the world as a continent. According to the IEA, it's 43% for the region as a whole. But some countries are much lower than that. Malawi, for example, was only about 10% a few years ago. Number of reasons for this. Firstly, there's not enough generation resources to provide enough power. But secondly, there's a lot of losses in the transmission and distribution sectors. The losses can be as high as 50% in some countries, with an average of 20% or more across the region. And if you compare that to averages of 7 to 10% across the rest of the world, that shows that a lot of electricity that is being produced is being lost in the network. The key trends that we will discuss today as part of the discussion move towards clean energy, decentralization, and digitalization. The topic for today, smart grid and digitalization in Africa. I am delighted to welcome two great guests. We have Bas Krumer, Director of Intelligent Networks, DNVGL, and David Green, Senior Research Manager from Omdia. Thank you for joining us both. So I think firstly, Bas, if you could introduce yourself and also introduce the topic for us in terms of what smart grid and digitalization, what these technologies can do and what role they can play in the electrification of Africa and making energy available for all.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. Bas Krumer, DNVGL. I'm broadcasting from the Netherlands, Rotterdam area. A long time ago, I studied power engineering in Delft University of Technology. I worked for ABB. I worked for KEMA at that time. I worked for Eneco Stedin, the grid operator, one of the grid operators here in the Netherlands. Quanta Technology, Accenture, Smart Grids, and Cybersecurity. And I'm back in DNVGL, that acquired KEMA some time ago, working in the intelligent networks and the communication. So in my whole career, I've been working in the process automation and the control of electricity grids. And not only electricity, it's also gas and water because it's all infrastructure. and different processes with different speeds and different requirements. But what you really see, and this is the digital transformation and the energy transition, this all has to do with automating our process. And this is also then the challenge that you see that Africa continent has in catching up and seeing how to deal with these renewable energy sources that are coming in, while actually you were still building on your grids and trying to put in your first levels of automation or your second. So everything is coming to you at the same time. One of the things, for instance, if you look in the Netherlands, we've been doing this automation since the 80s already. In the 90s, that's when I started. And we've rolled out smart metering for everybody. I was one of the rollout managers for some of the parts. But interestingly, is that then the best bang for the buck if you look at Africa? Should you have smart meters everywhere in a household, or should you do it on strategic places first in a little bit higher level of the grid, and look at distribution automation as a whole and try to reduce your technical losses, and also try to manage all the renewables coming in and managing the capacity of the grid? So what you see is you have so many different elements that you have to put the puzzle together, and it's not always easy to make the right choices. Luckily, there's a lot of knowledge out there. We in the NVGL and also the Intelligent Network team, we have an office also in Dubai, where Andrew is, where Brian is, and we're doing a lot of projects actually in the African continent. And it's really good to see how much, well, I wanted to say energy, enthusiasm and energy is there to automate this grid and to make those next steps for the transition. So I think that was a long enough introduction from my side.
Great, thank you, Bas. Great overview there of some of the key issues. David, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and also maybe just introduce what you feel are the key technologies or the key way that digitalisation can assist with electricity provision in Africa.
Sure, thanks Andrew, and hello to everybody. So I'm David Green, I'm Senior Research Manager for our Smart Buildings and Energy Infrastructure team at Omdia, part of Informa. So we're a market research consultancy. We've been covering the smart utility space long since before I joined. I've been around this space in Informa for around the last 5 years. But we've been covering the market for kind of 15 years as the smart metering wave took hold across electricity, water, gas, heat meters as well, and on a global scale. Increasingly, of course, that now looks at not just the hardware itself, but the connectivity aspect, the software and services, the applications, and the reasons why people move to digitalization. And I think to answer your second point, digitalization, and I'm sure we'll touch on this more, but in my opinion, of the 3 Ds, the decarbonization, decentralization, digitalization, the first 2 are maybe things that are happening to a utility. Of course, they're involved, but particularly in more established markets, things like decentralization or solar or the way that the smart home is changing is something that's happening to a utility to some extent. It's maybe a little bit of a threat. Whereas digitalization is the one that utilities can really take ownership of and start recovering some of that back. So particularly in the areas of, say, revenue protection, which of course in a kind of post-COVID scenario is incredibly important. When it comes for the African utilities in particular, it's kind of, you've talked about the fact that the opportunity is limited by current electrification, but of course that is increasing. We're not going to see kind of national rollouts like we do in, say, Europe, but it's very project driven. And because it's very project driven, there's a real visibility of what the technology does within that specific project. So people can really go towards outcomes of what they want from that technology. The other interesting thing, and maybe just to kind of say a contrary point, is that whilst maybe there is less opportunity in terms of number of projects, because there's not that historical legacy infrastructure in place in some places, like you would have in, say, North America or Europe, actually sometimes maybe that makes more opportunity to move directly towards a more technologically advanced solution. than you would have in some of those other markets where it's a lot more wrapped up in, well, how long do we have to keep the legacy infrastructure going? How long do we have to wait for regulations to change, for example? So it's kind of opportunity, but also challenge, I think, for digitalization.
Great. Thank you, David. So I think to start, you both raised some good points there. That digitalization, it obviously covers a lot of things, as you said, Bas. It's automation. And David, you made the distinction there as well, that there's hardware and there's the software elements to it. So if we start with the hardware, for a country with a low electrification rate, a lot of losses, Bas, in Africa, what is the hardware that's available now to help them with that? I mean, obviously the sensors would be the first one that comes to mind. What else do you think? What technologies are out there to help with electrification?
Well, the first thing you always say, especially also talking hardware, is primary equipment, because that's the main source through which you will transport and distribute your electricity. And also improvement of those connections will support your electrical losses and lower them. And the next step would be, if you want to automate all the remote switches and the remote sensors, you can say, do I want to have, you will look for a combination of both. And technology wise, everything is out there that you want to buy. But how much do you want to buy? And do you want to spend all your budget on one topic, or do you spread it out in a smart way? So the hardware per se is it's important to understand and to look at, and also that you're buying something that is not too old technology and will stay alive for at least 10, 15, 20 years. What is more important is the communication technology. In a way, you can say that's hardware also, but it facilitates. And if you want to automate, then you have to check, how do I make sure that those signals come to those centralized places? We talked about centralization and decentralization, yeah, but what is then centralized and what is still what is still centralized, what can be decentralized? But you have to collect signals, you have to process signals, so you have to bring them together. And technology for communication changes over time. How can you do that in a smart way without rolling out big telecommunication networks like in the Western countries has already been done? And they had a different business case, by the way, anyway. So from the hardware point of view, put in those sensors on those places where you can gain the most. So it starts with studying, where do I lose where do I have the highest technical losses, and focus on that first, and then roll it out bit by bit. And every time think about, where do I get the highest impact for that investment? Because many times it's so easy to say then, oh, now I do this and then I do it 1,000 times. Now do this, maybe do it 100 times and do 100 times something else also. I think that is the biggest complexity to deal with, the multi-dimensions of such a puzzle.
Sure. I attended a lot of webinars this year looking at, say, markets like the Middle East with much more developed electricity infrastructure. And there's a lot of discussion about COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic. So remote sensing and using mobile sensors and things are important. But in a market, in a continent, where there's a number of markets in Africa where there's not electricity, or there's not good transport routes, and there's not people going there or companies going there that regularly, I guess remote sensing equipment and the technology through communications is vital for that. And also, I mean, I guess I've made a distinction between hardware and software, but a key part of this, having the sensors, is collecting the data, isn't it? Where to find out where there's faults, and then what you do with this information, how it's processed, is is key to how you're going to fix it as well. So David, from the work you've done on smart metering and sensors, what do you think's key for a network in Africa? What do you think's out there that can help identify the problem?
I think, in fact, that last phrase is exactly it, helping to identify the problem. I think I definitely see a bit of a transition going on right now. Certainly to date, the very clear focus, and this will remain a key focus, but one of the key reasons that smart metering has been used in the region is simply to get billing up, the rate at which people are actually paying their bills, to try and increase that. We see a lot of prepayment metering, increasingly smart prepayment metering. In some cases, I've heard case studies, for example, where literally by doing that, you can actually make the utility solvent to start with, rather than having to wait. The case study in mind, they had an average debtor days of over 100 days it took for people to pay bills on average. By using some of the prepayment metering, they can bring that forward, so they can actually be kind of cash positive. And that then allows them to start investing in some of the other technologies. So to date, I would say a lot of the smart metering deployment has clearly, obviously, been driven by that billing aspect. But now we start getting towards some of these other applications, some of the things that Baz was talking about, for example, which is more on the let's say, asset management, for example, managing cost. And like you said, identifying the problem. The first step is just getting visibility of what is actually out there. You can't fix a problem until you can define what it is. You can actually measure it, for example. So the first step is putting that in place, getting those measurement points. I mean, smart metering in Africa is still, I would say, relatively low. If we say next year, so in 2021, we know 120 million smart meters will ship worldwide, right? But smart metering shipments in Africa for electricity won't top 1 million per year until 2025. So it's still kind of project by project creeping up. What is interesting is, like I said, that transition. So away from purely just on billing and more towards some of the applications that you can layer on top. But I think it's important to understand the motivations of why people are doing it. And like I said, the two aspects that stand out are managing cost and improving revenue. That's kind of the revenue protection aspect. And actually, we another one of my kind of fellow teams at Informa has an annual survey looking at IT spending, for example, across industries. And I took a look at the utilities aspect of this specifically for Africa, and it absolutely backs it up. So, for example, where we asked what's the #1 application for multi-channel technology deployment, it's billing. It's customer focus. It's all about billing. And what is the #1 application they're looking at for spending on analytics is revenue protection. So again, it kind of backs that picture up, that there's still relatively simple applications to start with, but especially for an African utility, that can have a hugely positive impact, really kind of transformational impact. And then you can start layering new applications on top of that.
Sure. And a question, I guess, for both of you. I mean, COVID-19, do you think that will help or hinder deployment of digital technologies? Because as you've both mentioned, it is a cost, which in the long run is worthwhile. But I guess there'll be concerns that utility revenues are down, that, okay, we're going to install some new transmission lines. Okay, the digital technology is an extra cost. Do we really need that?
Of course, because you cannot install a transmission line without the communication parts and the automation parts. It's all part of that. And then the cost of the line is so much higher than the cost of the automation. You cannot really compare that. And if you look at then the technical losses, is that cost on the transmission or is that cost on the distribution? It's probably more cost on the distribution parts. And what David just said, the comparison with the numbers of smart meters. Does every house need a smart meter? Or do you say, I'm not measuring at this moment on my distribution transformers. Let's first create that awareness and measuring in a more rough area. Because if somebody says smart metering, so that must be in the house. No, you can put smart metering up higher levels, hierarchies in the system. And then when you define and you find that, okay, here I have a spot where I'm having a lot of technical losses. Now I go dive deeper, and maybe there I start deploying some smart meters or prepayment meters. Unlike in the UK, you have a lot of prepayment meters, and in Holland we do not. And also the good thing is of those smart meters that if you equip them with a remote switch, you can switch off somebody from remote. In Holland, again, we cannot do that. We took it out, but
Right.
that was after they read the book Blackout, and they said we don't want that. So you will, if you are going to spend money now in your grid, and everybody will be doing it, and I don't think that COVID is bringing down the investments of the grid, because we're still using electricity, and
Sure.
and then everybody will need it, and it's growing. But automating your grid and being able to monitoring it better and running it more close to its capacity is you get much more money back than putting in a lot of copper and aluminum to get more energy transmitted. That was the old way of working in the Western world. So
Sure.
the first thought was invest in the grid, and then everything sorts it out itself. The dimensions of the grid originally in the Netherlands were 2-3 times what was needed. And now we cannot do that anymore. We don't have money and we don't have time. And we don't have space anyway in Holland. So that's easy. But
Sure.
you have to automate. So automation is I would still say the first thing to do.
The first thing. Sure. The smart meter, it's not just about billing, it's about getting the information back to help with operate the grid as well.
Exactly. And I mean, we made the point earlier, of course, it's more than just about the hardware. You have to then have the connectivity to transport the data. You have to have the software to analyze that. There's still cases of utilities. I mean, even the last time I went to a physical show, when we used to do that and meet in person, but the last time I was talking to a utility there, actually was a US utility, but we asked them, do you use the smart metering data for grid operations? They were on the grid operations side. They said, we'd love to, but we've been told we can't afford any more data storage, which to me was just incredible, kind of mind-blowing. So you still have to actually use the information that you generate, for example. But to go back to your previous point, you were saying, will COVID change the way it's adopted? From my opinion, the secret's out there, right? There was a time where certainly it would have done, and the digital part of the technology was always the kind of add-on, we'll do that afterwards. But I would say utilities often in markets are not directly competing against each other. It's not like you necessarily have a choice of supplier. So they're often in a race to be second to the market rather than first. Sure. And so there was a kind of, well, let's wait and see how other people do. Let's understand the ROI from somebody else. If anything, something like COVID, is particularly for AMI, for smart metering, is actually really proving one of those ROIs. So whilst, you might see a little bit of a lull, I guess, in public spending over the next 18 months, let's say, certainly beyond that, I actually see that this will accelerate the shift to digital. And even particularly between those utilities that already have some level of AMI and those that don't, because those that do are already seeing that benefit in being able to continue collecting revenue throughout, kind of untouched, whereas those that don't are now really seeing what the benefit of AMI would have been. So maybe it has a very short-term impact, but I think, the secret's out on digital. I don't think this is going to really kind of stop anything in the long term.
Sure. Yeah, it's common sense now. And Bas, obviously happening in tandem with the investing in digitalisation for utilities networks is the push for renewable energy. And that renewables create their own set of difficulties, don't they? It's variable resource. You've got peaks of demand, solar during the day, wind when it's windy. How important is having the right smart infrastructure? What can that do to help ensure you've got a stable supply of electricity across grids?
Well, the stable supply is the biggest challenge now, and in conventional systems, we would push the electricity from top to bottom, and that's how we design the grids. And today we're putting all kinds of power generation on lower parts in the grid that it was not designed to support. Therefore, you need also this automation to organize this in a better way. So we have the increasing demand and the increasing electrification, especially in continents like Africa. Everybody wants to use electricity and get more possibilities to apply it. So you have to, and then everybody is putting in solar panels and other renewable things on the bottom of the grid. So actually you have to look at all those local parts in the grid and see how you manage that without blowing up the grid. So maybe invest in that first in a combination. And so that would be, I would say, the challenge in keeping the balance. And here you also see that in those, again, like we discussed before, where are you hurting most? What are the weakest parts? How can I support those weak parts? And it's not only Africa. There's also European countries where grid parts are very weak historically seen. So what do you then do? Look at microgrids, look at local storage in batteries, and see how you can somehow balance the capacity in those grids and make sure that everybody can still use that. And again, the secret then is look at those parts where the impact is highest, and put in automation to organize it, because without that you cannot do it. So you have a very different way of looking at it than we did in the past in the Western countries. But at the same time, we've learned from this, so we know how to do it, and we can together support. But you have also so many more stakeholders now to deal with. So it is also a human element. Sure. Who is all involved.
Sure. Well, I think we've got a couple of minutes left. I think that's maybe a good point to finish on. I remember speaking to one of your colleagues earlier this year, and a study that DNV had done. I think it found something like 40% of companies, they thought the lack of a digital mindset was a problem when it came to digitalization. How important is that, fostering the right mindset?
That is probably the most important part. If you don't think that way, then it will never happen. And this is with digital, and it is also with cybersecurity. If you don't have the awareness and that push to do it, it will not happen. And actually, that was a point I wanted to make. And it's not only about the digital mindset. We're used to buying, you said, software, and then we collect some data and we process it. But we have bought in the past an application for this, an application for that. Every application had its own data structure, and therefore they could not really work together very easily. So we make all these interfaces and all these difficult things. An integration, it's very, very complex. And today you should, from a digitalization point of view, really look at how do I structure my data in my company? How do I make sure that I can exchange the data quickly enough between applications and that I do not get stuck? And that is something you learn from today's situation in other countries and in other vendors. The system integration is so important now with so much more data, that look at the boring structuring of data and data modeling stuff first, and then you can build on that. So if you don't do the foundation well, and then it comes back to if you're not into if you don't touch upon the human factor, and that you're not interested in digital, yeah, then your mindset has to be looking forward and looking ahead. How do I organize? So if everything is ideal, which it of course never is, but if 5 years and 10 years from now, this is how I think my grid will look and how I want to operate it. So how do I structure the foundations now that I'm building up on these blocks, that it will work together 10 years from now without that I have to redo it all? Because that is what's happening in some of the Western countries. Some things we have to redo again, or it is deferred 5 years because we cannot afford it, and we keep on doing awkward things that we wish we did not have to do. And here you have a chance to try and avoid it. But yeah, if you don't have the digital mindset, then it's the same with the cybersecurity. If you don't get the security culture, then and nobody wants to lock his doors and have a secure way of working. But it's the same with COVID. And the software doesn't get COVID. We get COVID because we don't manage to follow some rules.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's another topic, the security issue of automation and digitalization. Yes, David, final word to you. In terms of a mindset, see, African continent's very diverse, and the countries are at different stages of electrification process and developing new energy sources. But the mindset has to be from the public and the private sector, doesn't it? Governments can't just wait for the private sector to come in and introduce the technologies and sort of get their employees working on the mindset. There has to be a push from government. It has to be part of the planning process.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't say that's just unique to one continent either. I think that's pretty kind of universal across the place. I guess there was always going to be the question of where does the money come from, right? That's always going to be part of that particular equation, and maybe particularly in Africa, where we see the private sector getting more involved in driving some of those projects. So maybe that changes the balance a little bit. But yeah, it's everybody has to be in the same place, and there has to be this focus on the outcomes. Like I said, I think this gets easier the more that other people and other utilities have gone out there and built that track record of showing what a project can achieve, making some of the mistakes on the way. Perhaps people can start to learn from looking at other projects. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Public and private have to be able to work together, but it comes from shared mindset and shared goal at the beginning of the project. I think is very, very important.
Sure, great point to finish on. Working together, which yesterday was a key part of the discussion as well. The public and private sector need to work together. I'd like to thank Bas and David for raising some key issues today. It's been very interesting. We've discussed some of the technologies, the sensors, the smart meters, and also the importance of data. What you do with this information, how you store your data, how you use it is crucial as well. And to finish off the human mindset, the technology are available now, but making sure that the right mindset is in place at the government level, all the way through to private sector. As David said, that's not just for Africa, that's everywhere. But that will assist with the electrification process, making energy available for all. And also the point at the end about cost. We have a panel later this afternoon, and it's about financing. We have a 1 hour panel there, so please join me later for that. And we've got international financial institutions and some banks to discuss how capital can be raised for energy projects across Africa. So I'd like to thank our panelists once again, Bas Krumer from DNV GL and David Green from Omdia. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for listening.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.